Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time, we're looking at Occidental Petroleum.
OXY.
OXY, that's right.
Yeah.
And we've got company info, we've got financials, news analyst forecasts.
Really quite a bit to unpack.
Yeah, so by the end of this, you should have a pretty good picture of what they do, how they're doing, and what the future holds.
You know what I find really interesting is Occidental Petroleum. They're not just some like plain old oil and gas company.
Yo.
They've got a lot going on.
Yeah, they're involved in oil and gas, obviously,
Right.
acquiring, exploring, developing, and they're all over the U.S., Middle East, North Africa.
That global reach is huge because it helps them balance out, if one market's not doing well.
Right.
And of course, it means they're always dealing with
Geopolitics.
geopolitics all the time.
It's a global balancing act.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
So to get into like the specifics of what they actually do, we can look at their three segments.
Okay.
Oil and gas.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's the core exploration, development, production.
Bread and butter.
Then there's the chemical segment.
Okay.
Manufacturing and marketing basic chemicals, chlorine, caustic soda, that kind of thing.
A lot of people don't realize that's connected to oil and gas.
Right.
But it really is. Those chemicals are everywhere.
Yeah, they're super important building blocks for tons of industries. And then the last one is midstream and marketing.
Okay.
This is about getting the oil and gas products where they need to go, gathering, processing, transporting, storing, even marketing.
The logistics side of things.
Yeah.
Making sure it all gets to the people who need it.
So now that we know what they do, let's look at how well they do it.
Right.
The financials.
Yeah.
We've got their income statement here. And something jumps out right away, that jump in revenue between 2021 and 2022,
Uh-huh.
26 billion to over 36 billion.
We got to remember what was happening with oil and gas prices in 2022.
Oh, yeah.
It was a crazy year. Geopolitically, global demand bouncing back from the pandemic.
Right.
All that pushed prices way up. And that was great for companies like OXY.
So they're selling more at higher prices. Yeah. But revenue's just one part of the story.
Of course.
We got to look at gross profit, operating income, net income to really get the profitability picture.
Exactly. Those numbers tell us how well OXY is turning revenue into actual profit.
Right.
So gross profit, that's what's left after you take out the direct cost of production.
Right.
Operating income that factors in other expenses like administration, marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got your net income, the bottom line.
Oh, the big one.
Profit after all expenses are taken care of.
And looking at their income statement, we see some ups and downs over the years.
Well, yeah, that's oil and gas for you, cyclical.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Something always gets my attention, though, is free cash flow.
FCF.
FCF investors seem to love this number. Why is that?
Free cash flow is basically what's left over after a company covers its operating expenses and capital expenditures.
So what they can play with.
Exactly. It shows how much cash they have for reinvesting, paying dividends, paying down debt, that kind of thing.
Okay, so strong free cash flow, good sign.
Generally, yes.
It's like their financial wiggle room.
You could say that.
And looking at OXY's FCF, they seem to be in a pretty good spot, especially recently. But before we get too deep into the numbers, I want to talk about some news.
Oh, okay.
You know Warren Buffett?
Yeah, of course, who doesn't?
Well, he's been buying up more and more OXY stock through Berkshire Hathaway.
Really?
They own a huge chunk now, like 260 million shares,
Wow.
worth over $12 billion. It's their sixth biggest holding.
I wonder what that means.
It makes you wonder.
Yeah, it's definitely got people talking. It could be that Buffett sees something in OXY's future that fits his style,
Long term.
He likes companies with solid fundamentals that he thinks are undervalued.
Right, and here's where things get even more interesting. OXY is expected to increase its dividend next month.
Okay.
And based on what they've done before, we might be looking at an 8% hike.
That probably has to do with their strong free cash flow.
Right.
It lets them give back to shareholders through those dividends.
It shows confidence.
And a consistent growing dividend is very attractive to a lot of investors.
Especially if you're looking for income.
Yeah, exactly.
So we've got Buffett investing a possible dividend increase, but we can't forget about the analysts.
Right. We got to see what the experts who follow this industry closely are saying.
Exactly. And we've got some forecasts here. The average 12-month price target from 16 analysts is $61.19.
Okay, but remember, that's just an average.
Yeah.
And the range of estimates is pretty wide from $51 to $78. Forecasts aren't guarantees, but they give you a sense of how people are feeling about the company.
And speaking of feeling, the current analyst rating for OXY is hold.
Yeah, hold basically means they think the stock will probably perform in line with the market.
Okay, so not a buy, not a sell.
Kind of a wait-and-see approach.
Makes sense.
Mm.
Now let's look at the revenue and EPS forecasts. Analysts are predicting decent growth over the next few years.
Keep in mind, though, those projections are based on the bigger picture of the energy landscape, and we all know that's always changing.
Of course, oil prices demand geopolitics regulations. It all plays a role.
Exactly. Lots of moving parts.
Definitely a complex equation, and that leads us perfectly to part 2 of our OXY deep dive.
All right, let's get into it. Hashtag TTS, the deep dive episode 2025-01-24, part 2 of 3. You know, when we talk about these projections and this complex energy landscape, we have to remember the big shift that's happening.
Towards cleaner
From
energy.
renewables. Yeah.
Right. So how's OXY responding to that?
They're taking kind of a multi-pronged approach.
Interesting.
Yeah, they're investing in carbon capture and storage technologies.
So trying to reduce their impact.
Yeah, and they're also looking at renewables, solar, wind power, that sort of thing.
So hedging their bets a little?
You could say that.
But how are those initiatives actually doing? Are they making real progress, or is it more about appearances?
It's still early to tell, honestly. Some people say carbon capture is too expensive and not proven at scale.
Right.
Others see it as a necessary step towards a cleaner future.
Okay, so OXY is going to be under a microscope for this.
Yeah, investors and environmental groups are definitely watching.
Makes sense. Another thing that seems to always affect OXY oil prices.
Oh, yeah.
We all see gas prices going up and down, but what actually drives those swings?
It's a whole bunch of factors: supply, demand, geopolitics, even just market sentiment.
So if there's a disruption in supply,
Like a natural disaster or political instability, prices can go way up.
I see.
Global economic growth that drives demand up. If things slow down, prices can drop. And then you've got OPEC and those big oil-producing countries.
Right, they have a lot of power.
They can really move the needle.
It sounds like predicting oil prices is about as easy as predicting the weather.
Pretty much.
So how can investors even approach this uncertainty with companies like OXY?
Diversification, that's key. And a long-term perspective.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. Instead of trying to time the market, build a portfolio with different assets.
So energy stocks, but also other things.
Renewables, other sectors, mix it up. And look for companies that are adapting to the changes in the energy landscape.
Like what OXY is trying to do.
Right.
Okay, let's go back to OXY's financials.
Yeah.
We've talked about revenue, profit, free cash flow. But what about debt?
Yes, the D word.
How much debt are they carrying, and how does that affect their overall financial health?
Debt is a big deal for any company, especially in an industry like oil and gas, which needs a lot of capital.
Right.
OXY has taken on a lot of debt in recent years, mostly for acquisitions and investments. Some debt can be good for growth,
Okay.
but too much debt can weigh a company down and limit their options.
So how much debt is too much? Is there some kind of rule of thumb that investors should look at?
There's no magic number because it really depends on the industry, the company's performance, and what's going on in the market overall.
Okay.
But investors often look at things like the debt-to-equity ratio and the interest coverage ratio.
To see how much debt they have and if they can handle it. And looking at OXY's debt-to-equity ratio, they're on the high side compared to some of their competitors. Should we be worried?
It's worth keeping an eye on, for sure. A high debt-to-equity ratio can mean a company is using a lot of borrowed money to run its business,
Right.
which can be great when times are good.
But not so great when things go south.
Exactly. It amplifies the risk.
So high debt, a double-edged sword.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Let's shift gears a bit and talk about management.
Yeah.
Who are the key players at OXY and what's their track record like?
OXY's leadership team has a ton of experience in the energy industry.
They know their stuff.
Yeah. Vicky Hollub, she's been the CEO since 2016.
Right. She's pretty well known.
Yeah, she's
Yeah.
led the company through some tough times, and her decisions have been analyzed a lot.
She's considered a trailblazer too, right?
Oh, yeah. One of the few women leading a major oil and gas company.
What kind of reputation does she have?
Hollub is known for being decisive.
Okay.
She's focused on efficiency, and she's not afraid to make big moves.
Like that Anadarko Petroleum acquisition in 2019.
Exactly. That was huge. It reshaped the company, and it definitely had both fans and critics.
So she's a shaker and a mover. But how has her time as CEO affected OXY's performance?
That's tough to say definitively because there are so many factors to consider.
Right.
Financial results, strategic choices, leadership style, it's all part of it.
So under her watch, OXY has had some wins and some losses.
Yeah, they've dealt with oil price swings, made cuts to save money, and looked for new growth opportunities. But the Anadarko deal also added to their debt.
Which some investors are nervous about.
Right.
So it's a mixed bag. I guess that's common with big companies.
Yeah, for sure.
Now let's talk about competition. Who are OXY's main rivals? What are they good at? What are their weaknesses?
It's a tough industry.
Yeah,
OXY is up against companies like ExxonMobil, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, and plenty of others.
the big dogs.
They're all fighting for market share resources, investors. Each company has its own strengths and weaknesses, and they plan accordingly.
So how does OXY stack up? Do they have any competitive advantages?
They've got a lot of reserves, they focus on running things efficiently, and they're really good at unconventional oil and gas production.
Unconventional, like fracking and horizontal drilling.
Exactly. They've been leaders in those areas. But they also have challenges like those high debt levels and the fact that they're so exposed to oil prices.
The constant battle.
It is, but it's also exciting in a way.
What does OXY's story tell us about the future of the whole oil and gas industry?
I think OXY's journey reflects what's happening in the whole energy sector. There's this transition going on, there's uncertainty.
With climate change and all that.
Yeah, technology is changing, consumer preferences are changing.
Yeah.
The companies that can adapt, innovate, and handle this changing landscape, those are the ones that will succeed in the long run.
That's a great insight, and it leads us perfectly into part 3 of our OXY deep dive.
Yeah.
Hashtag TTS, the deep dive, episode 2025-0124, part 3 of 3. We've talked a lot about the big picture, but there's something we haven't really touched on yet.
What's that?
The human element.
Yeah.
You know, the energy industry employs a ton of people all over the world.
Oh, yeah. Millions and millions.
Their livelihoods are directly tied to companies like OXY.
Absolutely. We can get caught up in the numbers and all that,
Right.
but it's easy to forget about the actual people.
So with all this change happening in the energy industry,
Hmm.
what are some of the challenges and opportunities for those workers?
It's definitely a time of both uncertainty and opportunity.
Yeah.
As those traditional oil and gas jobs start to disappear, we're going to need more and more people with skills in renewables, carbon capture, all those emerging technologies.
So it's not just about replacing jobs, it's about retraining,
Yeah, reskilling, adapting to this new landscape.
which means changes in education and training.
And it also means support from governments and industry leaders to make sure those workers aren't left behind.
It's a shared responsibility, for sure. Okay, let's bring it back to the individual investor for a second.
Mm-hmm.
What are some key takeaways for someone thinking about investing in OXY or other energy stocks?
First things first, do your research.
Due diligence.
Yeah, really understand the company's financials, where they're headed, the risks, the opportunities. And you have to think about your own goals as an investor, your risk tolerance, how long you're planning to invest.
Because this sector can be pretty volatile.
Exactly. You got to have a long-term outlook and not panic when things go up and down.
And diversify.
Always diversify. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, especially in a sector like energy.
Great advice.
Yeah.
Now let's play devil's advocate for a minute. Some people say investing in oil and gas companies is just wrong ethically because of the environmental impact.
I understand that concern. It's complicated. The world still runs on oil and gas to a large extent.
Right.
And these companies are part of meeting that demand. The shift to cleaner energy, it's a process. It's going to take time, and it's going to take everyone working together.
Governments, businesses, individuals, we all have a role to play.
Absolutely.
It's not black and white. There's
Yeah.
a lot of nuance there.
Yeah.
Okay, before we wrap up, one last thing. We haven't explicitly talked about geopolitics. How do global events, political tensions, things like that, how do they affect a company like OXY?
Geopolitics is a huge factor in the energy industry.
Yeah.
Conflicts, sanctions, trade agreements, they can all mess with supply chains, affect oil prices, create a lot of uncertainty for companies operating around the world.
Right. OXY's got operations all over.
Exactly. So they have to be really good at navigating all that complexity, managing those risks.
High-stakes global game for sure. We've covered a lot today. OXY's operations, their financials, the big trends in the energy industry. If you had to pick one key insight for our listeners, what would it be?
I think the main takeaway is that the energy industry is at a turning point.
Yeah.
The decisions that companies like OXY make, the actions that governments take, the choices that investors make, they're all going to shape the future of energy. We're facing big challenges, but there are also incredible opportunities out there.
It's an exciting time to be following this industry.
It really is.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener? Maybe it's time to think about your own energy consumption, your investments, or just your understanding of this whole world of oil and gas. Keep exploring. Ask questions, form your own opinions. That's all from us, and as always, please help to like and subscribe. It really motivates us to do more content like this. Goodbye.